There was a time when the word of the United States was final. When Washington spoke, the whole world paused and listened. But that time has passed. India, the largest democracy and an emerging global powerhouse, has just shown everyone how to play the new game. And the United States is still trying to figure out what happened. This isn't simply about trade deals or angry political speeches. It's about a massive change taking place right now where the old rules no longer apply. India played its hand better, and America suddenly appeared vulnerable. For decades, sanctions were the magic bullet. That's the truth people often overlook. It wasn't about morality or justice. It was about control. America had built a system where stepping out of line meant punishment. Trade with someone Washington didn't like. Instant sanctions. Buy oil from the wrong source. Economic penalties. Go against US interests. Prepare for financial pain. For years, this worked almost perfectly because America held the levers, controlling the dollar, the banks, the shipping lanes, and even the narrative in global media. But now that old system is falling apart. It's like trying to use a flip phone in the age of smartphones. The world has moved on, but America's playbook hasn't changed. Nations no longer depend on American approval to survive. Countries like India, China, and Brazil are building their own frameworks, their own partnerships, and new systems for trade and finance. Ironically, every time America threatens sanctions now, it speeds up the process of others finding alternatives. India saw this change long before most and positioned itself wisely. When Washington pushed India to stop buying Russian oil, India didn't argue, didn't rant, and didn't make dramatic pronouncements. Instead, it simply said no, not rudely, not in a confrontational way, just firmly. The message was straightforward. This benefits our people, so we will continue. That wasn't rebellion. That was sensible leadership. The sanctions game is collapsing because nations finally have choices. They're not lining up for American permission anymore. They're creating parallel networks, and each time America raises that threat, it weakens its own influence further. It's like the story of the person who kept crying wolf. Eventually, nobody believes them. India didn't just wake up and suddenly decide to challenge the US. This has been a process that has taken years to develop. For decades, India remained cautious, a massive country with limitless potential, but politically careful, always polite, always willing to do business, and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. The world expected India to remain in that quiet role forever. Accept investment, follow directions, don't disturb the global order. But that India no longer exists. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, the tone shifted. This isn't about seeking fights or making enemies. It's about dignity and sovereignty. India is no longer content with being treated like America's junior partner. They are not an extension of Washington's foreign policy. They are a global power with their own goals, their own challenges, and their own future to build. The evidence is everywhere. India signs defense agreements with the US while simultaneously making energy deals with Russia. They join Western groups yet also engage in forums with China. They collaborate with American tech companies while investing heavily in homegrown innovation. India isn't choosing sides. India is choosing India every single time. That kind of independence makes older powers uneasy because for generations, geopolitics was binary. You're either with us or against us. Pick a camp and stay in it. But India is signaling something revolutionary. We are our own camp. They no longer need constant oversight or permission. And for empires used to control, that is deeply unsettling. What makes it more remarkable is that India is backing words with action, strengthening borders, expanding infrastructure, growing industries, boosting the economy, and extending global influence. True power doesn't need to shout. It shows itself through steady results. And India has been producing results quietly but steadily. When India continued importing Russian oil despite US objections, it wasn't just about energy security. It was about proving that American dominance has cracks. The reaction from President Donald Trump revealed that reality. He has always operated on a simple belief: power equals respect. Apply pressure and others cave. Show muscle and the world falls in line. For decades that method worked. America was the unavoidable option. If Washington demanded something, nations complied, not out of loyalty, but because there was no alternative. That monopoly is gone. Now, when India kept buying Russian oil despite Western outrage, it broke that old framework for all to see. Trump interpreted it as betrayal. In his worldview, allies should follow instructions. America invests in your growth, imports your products, provides access to markets. So in return, you obey. But India broke that simple equation. They bought Russian oil in huge quantities even when global media kept shouting about sanctions. Why? Because it was cheaper, reliable, and essential for India's population. Trump responded with tariffs, 25% hikes, trade restrictions, and economic threats. The classic US tactic, obey or suffer. But the problem was it didn't work. India didn't fold. They didn't panic. They calmly held their ground. That's why Trump's anger burned hotter. Not because India said no, but because America's threats no longer inspire fear in large nations. This marks the start of a new world order. The tools that once guaranteed US dominance, sanctions, tariffs, military displays, financial coercion, are losing their effectiveness against nations that are strong and confident like India. These tools fall flat. This frustration highlights a bigger truth. The unipolar world is finished. The era of a single superpower dictating global behavior has ended. Leaders who are stuck in the oldest versus them worldview can't process what's happening. Energy remains the ultimate foundation. That's the part Washington underestimated. A nation doesn't run on intentions or speeches. It runs on fuel. And India understands this reality better than many in Washington. India's oil deals with Russia weren't acts of rebellion. They were acts of rational governance. With 1.4 billion citizens and one of the fastest growing economies, India's energy demands are massive, powering factories, cities, and infrastructure. To improve lives, India needs affordable, reliable fuel. Russia, locked out of Western markets, offered exactly that, often at a 30% discount. While Europe struggled with soaring energy costs and shortages, India secured discounted oil quietly and efficiently. That choice wasn't Russia over America, it was India over everything. A government's duty is to its people, not to another country's agenda. But Washington viewed it differently. They demanded an absolute boycott of Russia, expecting nations to harm their own citizens for the sake of US foreign policy. India said no. They paid in rupees and rubles, bypassed the dollar system, and dealt directly with Moscow. That's not disobedience. That's innovation. That's independence. And that independence is dangerous for America's old dominance. Because if India can bypass the US-centric system and make it work, other nations can too. The real threat isn't the oil itself, but the example it sets. What India has built is a model where practical economics triumphs over political coercion, a model where national interest comes before external pressure, a model where countries don't need to ask for permission. Washington's biggest mistake wasn't tariffs, oil, or Russia. It was assumptions. They assumed India would obey, that pressure would succeed, that India would always behave like a junior partner in a Western-led order. That outdated mindset is falling apart in real time. For decades, US foreign policy relied on influence, military, economic, cultural. America became so accustomed to dictating terms that it forgot to check whether others were still willing to comply. They believed nations like India would forever trade their sovereignty for access and obedience for investment. But that is no longer the case. India doesn't seek validation anymore. This is not the 1990s when India was still finding its footing. Today, it is already the fifth largest economy and is on track to be the third. It is a nuclear power, a space power, and a tech innovator. India doesn't need a chair at someone else's table. It is building its own. Washington miscalculated. They thought tariff threats would frighten India into abandoning Russian oil. They assumed sanctions and media pressure would corner New Delhi into compliance. Instead, those moves only revealed how poorly America understood modern India. There was no panic, no emotional outburst, just the calm continuation of what was in India's interest. Because this is not about confrontation, it's about conviction. The Indian leadership has been clear, national priorities come first. Every decision, every partnership, every deal is filtered through that principle. And that means selecting trade partners based on practicality, not on approval ratings from Washington. That means refusing to compromise the welfare of its citizens for someone else's agenda. This isn't arrogance, it's maturity. And it signals a future where no single country has a monopoly on influence. The mistake Washington keeps making is assuming its dominance is eternal, that its control over the world's economic system cannot be challenged. But the cracks are already there. India has shown that alternatives exist, that resilience is possible, and that sovereignty doesn't have to be traded away. The world is adapting whether America acknowledges it or not. In a world with several centers of power, No single country holds that kind of dominance anymore. Trade can shift overnight, partnerships can evolve, and technology spreads influence faster than governments can regulate it. And India understands this reality. They're thinking in terms of decades, not days. This isn't about quick reactions or emotional responses. It's about evolution. When America responds with threats and punishments instead of respect and dialogue, it shows fragility. It proves they still view power as a pyramid with themselves at the top, issuing orders. But India doesn't operate like that. They don't need to knock America down. They just need to stand firm for themselves. And that's exactly what's happening. India doesn't aim to dominate the planet. That's what makes them unique. They only want to be left to manage their own affairs, to build, to expand, to innovate on their own terms. And in a system that has long thrived on influence, interference, and control, that idea is revolutionary. The true proof of power isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how much weight your silence carries. India's silence in recent years has been overwhelming. They don't respond to every accusation. They don't justify every policy choice. They simply act and let the results do the talking. And those results are loud. India is landing spacecraft on the moon. They're building the largest digital public infrastructure in the world. They're exporting vaccines, technology, satellites, and clean energy solutions. They're feeding more than 1 billion citizens while educating hundreds of millions. This is no longer about potential. It's about achievement. So when people talk about India rising, they're already behind the curve. India isn't on the runway anymore. They're already in the air. For decades, the world operated on one illusion that one country, one currency system, one way of thinking could control the globe. That illusion is dead. We're not moving toward a multipolar world. We're already there. America isn't collapsing. They remain powerful and inventive. But their monopoly on global influence, that's gone for good. And the sooner leaders accept this, the better they'll adapt to the future. What we are witnessing right now is a profound rebalancing of global power. It's not driven by ideology, not even by rigid military alliances, but by capacity, sovereignty, and practical value. And India is not just part of this transformation. They're shaping it. America is still strong but internally divided. China is swift and centralized but increasingly mistrusted worldwide. And then there's India, the largest democracy, young, vibrant, adaptable, and not bound to anyone's fixed playbook. This is why the present moment is so crucial. It's not only about new partnerships, it's about the birth of new power hubs, new circles of influence. India strikes energy deals with Russia, collaborates on technology with America, expands trade with the Middle East, and engages diplomatically with the global South. That's not a contradiction. It's a blueprint for the future of diplomacy. After the unipolar era, the old demand was loyalty. You were either with the West or against it, but such rigid black and white thinking no longer fits. In today's world, where energy, data, and innovation are everywhere, and where artificial intelligence and quantum technology will redefine war, finance, and healthcare, no single power can dictate terms. India knows this. That's why they don't sign up for every Western narrative. That's why they buy discounted Russian oil when it benefits their people. That's why they build domestic 5G, send rockets to the moon, and yet still sit down with both Washington and Moscow. Because in this new age, power isn't about domination. It's about options. The more options you have, the more leverage you control. And India has them, not just in foreign affairs, but in defense, energy, space, manufacturing, and digital systems. They can shift, they can negotiate, and most importantly, they can refuse. In global diplomacy, the ability to say no is the ultimate strength. The West, however, still interprets the world through Cold War lenses, seeing enemies, allies, punishments, and threats. India is thinking decades ahead toward resilience, toward technological sovereignty, toward strategic flexibility. This future isn't chaotic, it's more democratic. It may look messy, but it gives more nations a voice. It allows rising powers to emerge without sparking wars. It enables cooperation without coercion. The question isn't whether a multipolar world is coming. It's already here. And India isn't just adjusting to it, they're mastering it. If there's one lesson the West must absorb now, it's that the age of control is over. You can't sanction loyalty into existence anymore. You can't shame independent nations into obedience. And you certainly can't lecture ambitious powers while ignoring your own crisis. If the West wants to remain relevant, it has to adapt. That begins by treating emerging powers as equals, not as subordinates. Stop treating world leadership like a one-way street. Accept that cooperation doesn't require total alignment. Understand that genuine partnerships don't need submission. The world is no longer run by one power or even two. It is becoming decentralized, multidirectional, and far more dynamic. India is one of the architects of that design. The West can be angry. It can issue warnings. It can push for sanctions. But here's the fact Washington hasn't fully faced, yet the era of control is finished. You cannot bully more than 1 billion people into compliance. You cannot erase sovereignty through tariffs. You cannot sanction self-reliance out of existence. India is not playing for today's headlines. They are playing the long game. They are building, calculating, innovating, and planning for generations, not just for the political moment. And that is what real power looks like now. It's not about control. It's about resilience. It's not about obedience. It's about autonomy. It's not about fear. It's about vision. India holds that vision, and they are no longer hesitant to act on it. So, yes, Trump may be outraged. Western governments may feel frustrated. But India is just getting started. There was a time when America's voice was final. When Washington spoke, the rest of the world obeyed, but that time is over. India, the world's largest democracy and a rising powerhouse, has just demonstrated how to adapt to a new era. And America, still clinging to old tools, is left searching for answers. This isn't about symbolic gestures or political tweets. It's about a seismic shift where outdated rules no longer work. India understood that shift and played it better, leaving America looking weaker. For years, sanctions were America's favorite weapon, and people often miss the point. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about enforcing control. Washington created a system where stepping out of line meant punishment, trade with someone they disliked, sanctions, buy fuel from the wrong partner, economic retaliation, challenge U.S. authority, financial pain. It worked because America controlled the levers, the dollar, the banks, the sea routes, and even the global narrative. But that system is breaking apart. It's like trying to use a flip phone in the age of smartphones. The world has shifted, but America's strategy hasn't. Today, countries don't need American permission to thrive. Nations like India, China, and Brazil are constructing their own systems and alliances. Ironically, every time America threatens sanctions now, it speeds up the search for alternatives. India anticipated this long before most and positioned itself accordingly. When Washington pressured India to stop buying Russian oil, India didn't argue, didn't stage dramatic protests. They simply said no, not rudely, but firmly. The reasoning was clear. This benefits our citizens, so we will continue. That wasn't defiance. It was sensible governance. The sanctions game is losing relevance because countries finally have options. They're building networks independent of US approval. And each time America plays the sanctions card, its influence diminishes a little more.